After the release of the album, which met with a muted response from fans and criticism from the music press, Waits travelled to Europe for the first time. Making his British debut at London's Ronnie Scott's Jazz Club, Waits was highly praised by the English press, who were enticed by the otherness of his beat persona. London proved an artistically fruitful city for Waits, and the experiences that he had in the English capital formed the basis of many of the songs of his next album, Small Change. On his return to the US, Waits re-entered the recording studio to create what many felt was his finest album to date.
I think on Small Change, you begin to see that Waits has transcended his own influences. Whereas with Nighthawks at the Diner, you feel it's almost self-parodic, and indeed it was not very well received. With Small Change, the influences are still there, the setting is still there, but somehow the songs are just more convincing and more focused. They're more personal.
The piano has been drinking. My necktie is asleep. And the combo went back to New York. Jukebox been busted for several weeks.
I think this is when people really start saying, okay, this is a major talent here. This is, we're gonna stay with this guy. He's not. This isn't a novelty act.
Why Small Change is regarded as one of the best albums in that period, I'm not entirely sure. I think it's a development from Nighthawks, but I see those two albums very much as companion pieces almost, and you could even extend it and say actually there's a trilogy with the album that follows as well, and they are, to me, those three albums taken together are the peak of that boho, barstool, philosopher character. Why Nighthawks is disregarded or he's, has a fairly low reputation, and why I've never understood that, to be honest.
Small Change was I think the kind of the audio version of what he was doing on stage.
Reworking the traditional waltzing Matilda on the album's opening song, Tom Traubert's Blues, Waits delivered one of his standout tracks of the decade.
Waltzing Matilda was an interesting song. Waltzing Matilda is a tune that many people kind of associate with him for different reasons. Tom called me one afternoon and said, I've got this great tune that I wrote. He said, you got to hear this tune. It's just beautiful. You got to hear it. So I can't remember where we went. We might have even gone into a studio. Somebody called, found an empty studio, sat down at the piano, and he played me this tune. I said, Tom, that's beautiful, I said, how did this come about? He said, well, I bought a pint of rye. I went down to Skid Row, bottle of rye in a brown paper bag. He said, I sat down on the sidewalk next to these guys. He said, every one of these guys, a woman put him there. Every one of them, a woman put him there. He said, I drank the bottle of rye, I went home, threw up, and wrote Tom Traubert's Blues.
Now see tomorrow if Frank and I borrow a couple of bucks from you.
Schmaltz and the way Waits uses schmaltz and strings and so forth is a very important aspect of his work, certainly up until Swordfish Trombones, because he treads a kind of fine line between sort of sending it up and really kind of wallowing in it, I think Tom Traubert's Blues is the first really triumphant kind of piece of Waitsian schmaltz. It's terrifically sentimental, and yet it's extremely moving. Not many people would get away with that degree of sentimentality, but partly because of the use of his voice, this extraordinary voice that he found, that's it's like a sort of anti-operatic voice. It's the opposite of bel canto. It's the opposite of beautiful singing as we would understand it. And it's certainly not kind of natural. It's an assumed voice. It's a put-on vocal persona. But I think it's it's the key to why so many of Waits's more schmaltzy things work.
Waits would continue to rework traditionals and passages from popular songs both in his live set and on record, and through the unusual nature of his choices, added another element to his music.
Silent night, holy night.
You know, when Tom Waits plays around with songs like Waltzing Matilda and Silent Night, I think those songs represent a kind of communality and, you know, Christmas, you know, holidays, this sense of you and the family's bosom and the bosom of your community and your faith, all of which has been lost to his character. So when his characters are groaning out Waltzing Matilda and you know, growling Silent Night, you know, that is their kind of almost Beckett style, you know, poignant memory of what once seemed possible. So there's a, you know, there's a kind of, they're there not to sort of, I mean, they stir the emotions that those songs typically do, but only by way of trying to demonstrate their absence. And I think that's what's so affecting about it. You know, it's a way of recontextualizing that music to dramatize the kind of desperation of the characters who were singing it.
Although the setting remained the same as the previous albums, Waits had begun to view the alcohol abuse of his persona and his characters in a slightly different light.
I think getting away from the States, it made him take the character somewhat a little bit more seriously and get a little bit more into the black side of a lot of the things, like I mean, Tom Traubert's Blues. I mean, just the opening line, wasted and wounded ain't what the moon did. I mean, that's a lot darker and a lot more incisive than a lot of the earlier stuff that was there. I mean, he always was sort of skimming on the top of the darkness before, and he was sort of plunging a lot deeper into it then.
Well, I ended up with a bad liver and a broken heart. Yeah, I drunk me a river ever since we've been apart.
On songs like Bad Liver and a Broken Heart and The Piano Has Been Drinking, there's a darker and, if you like, more mature attitude to this sort of slightly self-destructive boho image. You know, it's not just the broken heart. There is the bad liver as well. You know, it's getting quite dark.
This change in direction was in part prompted by Waits' re-evaluation of his drinking and lifestyle.
In the early days, he was Tom, and we hung out a lot together. As he got more and more into it, the actor in him came out, and he really he became that character. I mean, the way he dressed, and it was kind of like a Skid Row bum in a way, just a notch up, you know, and a wino, kind of. And he started going down that path, and it got a little scary, and he caught himself and said, whoa, you know, just kind of at the brink almost, and backed right off of it and changed his direction and got, you know, a lot healthier direction. And that was pretty amazing, I thought, because he was so far into that character, you know, he was actually living it.
A further innovation on the album was the track Small Change, which introduced a film noir atmosphere only hinted at on previous releases.
He said, I've tried and tried, but I can't turn Small Change into a song. He said, it's something I've got to recite like a piece of verse of poetry or something. And I said, well, you know what? You'll just recite it and we'll score it like it's a movie, like it's a little movie. We'll just do it with underscoring. And I had worked with an arranger named Bob Alcivar, who was a wonderful orchestral arranger, and had worked on a few films. And I said, Bob, do you think we could do this as a recitation and you could underscore it? And he said, yeah. And I said, now here's the trick. I want to record it live. I want him to do the recitation live, because I don't think that he'll do well doing overdubs and, you know, in an empty studio. He needs to have the whole orchestra around him and stand in the middle of the room and have the orchestra, and you conduct the orchestra and he does the recitation. And that's what we did.
Would start raving mad. And the cabbies were the only ones who really had it made. And his gold trousers were twisted.
The film noir aspect of the album, I think, again, he's out of time. The sort of stuff he's referring to and evoking are very much late 40s, early 50s film noir, black and white. You know, dames got slapped around. You know, guys always wore good-looking hats. Everyone smoked like chimneys. You never knew who to trust. It was a world of shadows and light, more shadows than light. Yeah, I mean, that's what comes across on that record. It's slightly down at heel. It's sort of scuzzy, scuffed. I think the cover's it, isn't it? I mean, it's that bored-looking stripper just with her head turned away, and Waits coming off a night on the tiles, and it's slightly seedy. You can smell the sort of stale cigarettes and the stale whiskey, and it's just run down, and he wasn't afraid that was going to be his image. I mean, that's what the image he wanted to put across, and did it very convincingly. He really conveyed that sort of guy who'd been, you know, squished up in a ball and then just discarded.
Small Change was a huge success both critically and commercially. It was the first Waits record to enter the Billboard Top 100 Albums chart, and he followed its release with a world tour. His profile sufficiently raised, Waits was suddenly given the opportunity to unleash his wit on national television talk shows.
I'll play some real toilets.
I did my share of that too, believe it or not. Yeah. I played some great ones, boy. Gussie's Kentucky Lounge in Chicago.
I was there last night.
As a comic, he's not one of those comedians who drops the joke and then waits for the laughter and the applause and sort of plays off the audience like that. It's absolutely deadpan. He's not fishing for the reaction, you know. He will just drop in these droll asides and moves on, you know, and he's into the next one before you've even quite digested the previous one, and that's hugely attractive.
Over the years, the television talk show would become a familiar arena for the singer, in which the humour that he had developed for his stage performances was allowed to flourish.
And you just got here early this morning, late last night. When did you come in?
Late last night, the driver gave me carte blanche. He said I can charge everything to NBC.
Great.
So I've been making a lot of calls, and I got a new suit, and going to Singapore for a couple of days. And I really appreciate that.
Oh, sure, anytime.
Tom Waits' humour has been very important both in the development of his career and in his art as a whole. I mean, it's been important in the development of his career in that he's probably always been able to attract really more television and media attention than somebody of his commercial profile normally would, just because people know that if you get Tom Waits on a television program, he'll be funny, he'll be sharp, he'll say something interesting.